Hello, and welcome to S.T.E.A.M of Consciousness, a program presented by the ARI Podcasting Network and hosted by George Koperna. What is S.T.E.A.M? S.T.E.A.M stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. During each episode, we will take a few minutes to sit down with professionals in different STEAM-related fields to give them an opportunity to share their story and give their perspectives with the goal of promoting career awareness to potentially interested students, young professionals, and of course, anyone else who shares a fascination with these areas of study. And now, please join us as we tap into the STEAM of consciousness.
Welcome to S.T.E.A.M of Consciousness. I'm George Koperna, your host, and today we're pleased to have Dr. Richard Esposito with Southern Company join us. Good morning, Richard.
Hey, George. Thanks for the opportunity today.
Yeah, so I really appreciate you taking time to sit down and chat with us, and I think you have an interesting story to tell, and I'm really looking forward to putting it out there so everyone can hear it. So first off, could you tell us a little bit about Southern Company and what you do for Southern Company?
Sure. Southern Company is an electrical utility. We're primarily focused with our regulated business unit in the Southeast United States, and you probably have heard Georgia Power, Alabama Power, and Mississippi Power. And we're a fairly vertically integrated utility. We have generation, transport of electrons, and distribution. And unique thing about Southern Company is we have a internal research and development group, and I work in that group. And we evaluate technologies, things that will provide us with clean energy moving forward, with producing electricity in the future, and also just looking at environmental issues that we face as an industry.
Well, that's super interesting, and I know you and I have interacted quite a lot over the last several years along the planes of carbon capture and storage, but Southern Company does so much more than just that, right?
Sure. We have in our research group, we work across the full span of power production, transport, and distribution, but also with environmental controls is where I'm focused. And yes, we've done a lot of work over the years looking at technologies like carbon capture and storage, but we're also looking at technologies such as geothermal, looking at energy storage technologies, looking at just anything that really is a need for the company moving forward with our future.
It sounds like a really critical component about what Southern Company's moving forward into, having this, let's call it a energy expansion, if you will.
Right. And yeah, and it is interesting times right now with data centers and other load demands coming on the company. It's challenging for us to develop that generation and do it responsibly in an environmental manner.
Now, I introduced you as doctor, so obviously you have your PhD, and so you're much smarter than the average petroleum engineer, as I point it myself. But let's talk a little bit about what got you interested into this and how you ended up where you are today. Where did the spark in the geosciences come from?
Yeah, so that's an interesting story, George. So anyone watching this podcast who knows me may or may not be surprised to hear that I didn't really get great grades in high school. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that, high school, you're not really sure what you want to do. You're taking classes, and especially back in when I was in high school, there wasn't a lot of opportunities to take classes that got you interested in careers. I mean, it was kind of the basic curriculum. So, my dad was a dentist. I thought, pre-med or go be a dentist. We tend to emulate what our parents do sometimes. And so when I did go to college, I started off as pre-med. And I remember my academic advisor saying to me, you need to take some elective classes. You need to take some classes outside the core curriculum for the pre-med program. And she said, a lot of people really get good grades taking the geology classes that are offered at the university. So I took geology as an elective, and it was interesting because I really enjoyed it, and I did well. I excelled in it. The next semester came around, and there was another geology class. So the first one was historical geology. The second one was physical geology. So I took those two classes, and there were no more geology classes. So I kind of had this, you know, fleeting moment where I was really interested in something, but there wasn't an opportunity for me to kind of further that. And then a lot of people don't know this about me, but I went through this period where I had some really significant health issues, and I was diagnosed with this rare condition called GWS. And my academic advisor first identified it, and GWS stands for Geology Withdrawal Syndromes. And because I wasn't taking geology classes anymore, I was depressed. I was couldn't focus. I had headaches, and so fortunately, the university that I went at was called Belmont Abbey University in North Carolina, outside of Charlotte. They had a 3-2 program where you could go to Belmont Abbey for 3 years and then transfer to another university, and all the credits would transfer. And they had a program set up with Auburn where you could transfer to Auburn University and continue, you know, your pursuit of a science career, which they did not have at Belmont Abbey. They didn't even have a geoscience program. And I ended up, you know, taking geology classes there and fell in love with geology, and getting my bachelor's in geology. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is, you know, I'm a firm believer that things happen for a reason. And so when I graduated with my bachelor's in geology, it was in the mid 80s. Oil and gas industry was just completely down. There were no jobs in the oil and gas industry. As a matter of fact, they were laying people off, and the jobs in private industry were getting flooded with the ex-oil and gas industry geologists. And keep in mind that that was a point in time when the role of a geologist was not nearly as expanded as it is today. There's a lot of different opportunities for geologists and geoscientists today that did not exist in the early 80s. And so I made the decision to stay and get a master's, which was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because it allowed me to fall in love with research and to do a thesis. And it also allowed me to start visualizing a career opportunity with geology and not just appreciating geology as a science, which is, you know, at a bachelor's level, you're taking geology classes, but at a master's, you're kind of forced to pick sedimentary petrology or geophysics or whatever you want to go into. So getting a master's really set the stage for the rest of my career. And it allowed me, frankly, to get a job coming out with my master's in subsurface stratigraphy, working in the area of hydrology as a regulator, which allowed me to interact with people at Southern Company, because I was actually regulating Southern Company as a regulator at the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, and ended up getting a job at Southern Company, which is the beginning of the end.
That's GWS. I love it.
It's a real thing. It's you can look it up in the Urban Dictionary. It's in the Urban Dictionary.
let me reel it back a little bit. You know, there was a lot of people that were impacted. You talked about a downturn in the oil and gas industry, and the geosciences largely funneled up into either environmental businesses or oil and gas industry. And so I think several people had those, let's say, career paths drawn for them to go back and get a master's degree. And so when you went back and you decided to go back, why did you stay at Auburn? Was there anything elaborate about that? Did you look at other opportunities?
Yeah, it was. So I would say it was a matter of convenience alone, because, you know, I was there, I was established, I knew the professors. I actually got a scholarship there, so that played a role. I did apply to a couple other universities, but was not accepted with money and scholarships and things like that. So it kind of is something that just kind of fell into place. It was comfortable, you know, at that age, you know, you go with kind of comfort things. And, you know, I've always thought that it's okay. This is an interesting distinction. I think it's okay to get a bachelor's and a master's at the same university. I don't think it's okay to get a master's and a PhD, because when you're dealing in the research world with a certain group of professors and at an institution, it's better you go somewhere else for a PhD than a master's to get that perspective from other people.
And look, I was in much the same way when I got my undergrad degree in the oil and gas industry. It was a downturn. And as a petroleum engineer, I was much more narrowly focused than even a geoscience major in some regards. And so I ended up staying at the same university as well. And I knew the faculty. It was, as you said, it was convenience, comfort, all of these C words. I mean, really made me comfortable there, and felt like I could contribute. So I think as you rolled forward into your graduation with your master's degree from Auburn, you mentioned that you were an Alabama regulator.
Yeah.
And
So
so go ahead.
yeah, again, I applied to a lot of places, but the oil and gas industry was still depressed. And you're correct. You pointed out that a lot of us gravitated to the environmental industry because that was the environmental awareness period of time in the late 80s and the 90s, where environmental regulations, the Clean Water Act, and a whole bunch of things was coming on the table. And there were a lot of opportunities for geologists in the environmental management realm, either with consultants doing, phase one and phase two site assessments, or working as a regulator. And I really believe I was very fortunate to get a job as a regulator because it was that experience as a regulator that I think really caught Southern Company's eye, that they wanted that perspective on people with respect to compliance with things that they were doing. And so transitioning to doing environmental work at the power company was a very easy transition for me to do, from a regulator to industry working there. The more difficult thing was to recognize that after about 15 years of doing environmental work, that I was getting a little bit, I don't want to say bored, but it was kind of repetitious. And it was the same sort of thing: installing shallow groundwater wells, doing groundwater monitoring, taking soil samples, writing up reports. And at that point, it's interesting, and the role of a geologist started evolving, right? Some other opportunities started showing themselves, and carbon capture and storage, carbon sequestration started becoming something, right? Back in the, early 2000s. And so that was a big decision to go back and get a PhD in engineering. That was very difficult to do, but it was very much supported by the company, both financially and in principle. And it also came with the potential for having a job doing that type of work and moving into the research group. So really that was in some respects a fairly easy decision. It was difficult to do it because we all know, as a geologist, and we're thinking as a geologist, taking engineering courses is not ever an easy thing, okay, for a geologist. It's probably easier for engineers to take geology classes, frankly. Okay.
To be fair, I've done my fair share of geology courses too, and it's a very different process and thinking, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, getting the PhD and focusing in on CCS was it was kind of a big risk. I mean, it was not a big risk, but it was something, it was a little adventuresome, but I really felt like it was the right thing to do at that time in my life for the best career opportunities. And I would encourage everyone that even if you've been working for 20 years and you see an emerging area that looks like it's going to be very strategic in the future with good opportunity and growth, that don't hesitate to go back and get an additional degree in that to build your pedigree and your standing in that area.
And some people that might be listening to us chat today, Richard, may not recognize that, hey, sometimes you can go out and get a job and that employer will support continued learning. And so how valuable, I mean, I think you're stating how valuable it is, but let's underscore it. I mean, that's a tremendous value to you.
Yeah. I mean, no, I've obviously been at Southern Company for 34 years, and I've always just thought it's the best company to work for, and they support employees. They support employees moving around internally to get experience so that they can better themselves. And that's just what they did for me. They with financial help, they allowed me to go back with tuition reimbursement and get a PhD. I did it at a local University of Alabama at Birmingham. And then they also provided a grant for a research project to look at enhanced oil recovery in the citronelle oil fields. So it was also a very trendy issue back then of something that would be very important.
And you're really building on your love of research that you garnered at Auburn, and it's fantastic. And you mentioned there being 34 years with Southern Company, and I think we'd be remiss not to talk about some of the other activities you've been doing. Not only did you get a PhD, you've volunteered at a number of different organizations, committees, etc. And I could parse them a bunch of different ways, but one of the ones that I want to talk about for a moment is on the education side. And you've done a number of activities with volunteerism in the space of outreach to students. You're president of the board of directors of, I'm going to look at this to get it right, Southern Company Technology, SOTEC, which I think is really interesting. Care to elaborate on that experience?
Yeah, that was an organization where we would try to educate internal employees on new technology trends and things like that. So that was that was definitely a rewarding experience, and to be involved in that. But just a lot of other things with, so I mean, early on, I recognized that I really liked the academia life, academics as well. And so I did teach. I developed a couple classes at Samford, not Stanford, but Samford University in Birmingham, teaching energy in the environment and environmental geology, and also taught some engineering geology classes at UAB, and served as a committee chair for PhD dissertations at UAB for several students. Because giving back to the students is very important, and giving presentations and doing things to help them, guide their careers in life, I think is really important.
And I think that's shown through. And I know a lot of the projects that we've worked on, educating not only your coworkers about what you're doing, plus bringing along students in those projects has been underpinning many of our R&D efforts in these spaces.
Yeah, I tell you, the other thing that I have gotten involved with, and I thank Pam Tomsky for this, is the REX program. The research experience in carbon sequestration, where they have students, and all the students over the years in that program has been amazing, and seeing where those students have ended up in the type of positions and the success stories that they have all become. And I think a small part of it, or some part of it, is from having been involved in that program, not only the knowledge that is passed on, but the networking and the support that we provide to each other. And then also I've recently been doing more HBCU work. We've had some geoscience conferences specifically for HBCUs, and understanding the challenges that they face at those universities. And they face the same challenge that I actually had, where there really isn't a geology degree at a lot of HBCU colleges. And so they need to develop these 3-on-2 programs where they can get the basic core education at HBCU universities, but then go on to another university and get that degree of what they really want to do in life.
No, and the way you've given back, I mean, you need to be applauded for that. The outreach to students, the outreach to early career professionals. I think you've been there, and I've been there to witness it. So thank you for that. And I think the other half of the coin, if you flip it over, is giving back to the industry. And you've sat on a number of panels and boards and professional certification groups that have really, that what is the Alabama Geoscience Board? Hopefully I got that right. The IEA, the GCCSI, and you've helped guide programs in R&D and development.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that type of work has been very rewarding, and the ISO standards, right? We've worked on those together. I was early on with the Canadian standard, the CSA for geological storage up in Canada, which spun off to developing the ISO standards for all type of things, and especially with CCS, and been actively involved in that. But CCS, it needs there's a lot of moving parts with CCS, the thing that I'm mostly doing right now. And things like standards and educating a future workforce are really important to the success of that technology moving forward. I mean, we have to have people to fill these roles to be able to do CCS. We need chemical engineers for capture, we need mechanical engineers for the transport, and we need lots of good geologists to deal with all the storage that we're going to be doing in the future.
No, here, I concur with that. And I think looking at developing that workforce, I mean, you guys have a really interesting, let's call it an R&D playground there in Alabama. And you care to talk a little bit about what you're doing at the National Carbon Capture Center?
Yeah, so that's DOE's funded National Capture Center, where we look at carbon capture technologies, and we have a large staff of chemical engineers there that would test. People could bring technologies there, and we would test those technologies and be third-party verification. It's a great facility. A matter of fact, almost all the carbon capture technologies that have advanced to commercial viability have come through that facility at one point or another, and it's a great opportunity to bring people there. We host groups there all the time to come and see the work that we're doing at the National Carbon Capture Center. And not only with that, but just anytime we're drilling a well in the service territory or engaged in a DOE project. You remember the Plant Berry project, where we built a 25 megawatt slipstream carbon capture unit and built a pipeline and did storage operations. We want to get as many people out to see that stuff as possible. We want to do as much stakeholder engagement, outreach, so that people can see this stuff and understand it. And hopefully, after seeing and seeing it in action, become more comfortable with it and understand that this stuff is safe and it is necessary.
And I think those, we'll call them field trips colloquially, but the tours and efforts. I mean, we've done a number of them, and I think they're just so well received to go out and see what a drill rig looks like, to see what rock that came from a mile or more down in the subsurface looks like. That equipment is getting your, not necessarily hands-on, because they're not, obviously not operating the drill rig, but getting to see what one looks like. I mean, it's something.
Yeah, we try to do as much as possible with outreach. In fact, we're going to be hosting the fall IEA Greenhouse Gas Technology Expo in Birmingham, and bringing these folks to the National Carbon Capture Center as the field tour. And a lot of people are unfortunately working in this area of CCS, but they don't get to see a lot of CCS activities in the field. So having the opportunity to go to something like the National Carbon Capture Center, having the opportunity to go see a well that's being drilled dedicated for carbon storage or for site characterization, to collect data to put together a Class 6 UIC permit is very important. I mean, it's key for us moving forward with this technology.
And it's remarkable to me that your environmental background, when you were talking about drilling boreholes, water wells, period, taking samples, monitoring those wells, leaned right into CCS. I mean, the subsurface storage part of it, they just flange up very, very nicely. And that background that you had, that maybe was getting a little dry after doing the same thing over and over again for a number of years, but you're able to advance your degree and transition that knowledge. And I think, how do you feel that set you up for the last 20 years?
Yeah. So George, that's a great point. And what I like to think of myself as a term, and people think of this term for different things, but I like to think of myself as a student of the business. And what that means is that my office is at the National Carbon Capture Center. I'm a geologist. I do have an engineering PhD, but it's not a chemical engineering degree. I listen to these folks talk about carbon capture. I mean, we have been involved in building some CO2 pipelines. When those are being done, I go to the site. I try to understand as much as I can about carbon transport. obviously I've got the background to understand the storage part of it and the permitting part of it, but I also love to go to the DC office and understand the policy behind it and get involved in the regulations and the development of regulations. And I mean, I think we need more people who are practitioners across the whole value chain of CCS to understand it and not be too compartmentalized. I commonly tell people that come to Southern, you know, early career professionals is put yourself in uncomfortable positions to force yourself to understand things that you don't understand with the technology that you're working on. Don't just put blinders on and look at one aspect of it. And I think CCS is the poster child because it's the integrated system of capture, compression, transportation, and storage and monitoring is important. And understanding something, although being an expert in one aspect of it, but understanding the whole thing, I think is very key to successful, you know, practicing in that area.
I couldn't agree more, Richard. I think you and I are in lockstep on that thinking. And I think underscoring how policy impacts that, how regulations impact that, and how you can leverage that understanding to develop functional projects that are commercial and not just R&D. Southern Company's been at the forefront of that since, oh gosh, mid 2000s in field demonstrations, Richard.
Yeah.
A lot of folks may not know that CCS dates back to the mid 90s. And so you guys were fairly early adopters as a company in the CCS business, and you should be commended for that foresight.
Yeah, our philosophy at Southern is to learn by doing. And the other good thing about Southern is they allow employees to go do due diligence trips. So, you know, we were together in Norway earlier this year where we got to see the cement, the carbon capture unit being built on the cement plant and see the offshore storage things. And recently got back from Rotterdam. They're doing amazing work in the Netherlands on CCS and getting to see that stuff, because at the end of the day, if you boil down everything, any research group, their prime function is to reduce risks. And to reduce risks, you have to understand risks. And to understand risks, you have to see things and to talk to people and be involved in doing things. So everything being pulled together, you know, if we do CCS in the future, we want as much experience in it as we can possibly have to be able to reduce the risks so that we do it safely, properly, and also being cognizant of budgets and costs and things like that.
And that budgets, risk management, you know, you're preaching to the choir, and I think putting that out there is tantamount to this is what all good practices should be doing, especially in something that's, again, been going on since the 90s, but is still very nascent as a commercial activity. And so, Richard, we're running up on time. I have one more question for you.
Mhm.
I think the through line, people can probably pull this out, but what do you love most about your job?
I love the flexibility of being in the office, traveling, going to field sites, having the flexibility to kind of put together the big picture about sitting in those rooms when the discussions on carbon capture is going on and understanding that. Just and then having the intellectual you know, ability to go to executive management and say, you know, we need to be looking at this. This is something in the future. And it's not just CCS, it's things like we've just commissioned some studies on white hydrogen. We are looking closely at geothermal. We're looking closely as using geological formations for energy storage. We're looking at deep borehole isolation techniques for spent nuclear fuels. It's the ability for me to be a true internal consultant, like you are an external consultant to industry. I'm a true internal consultant going to management and saying, you know, I think we're missing something here and we need to look at this. And 9 times out of 10 getting a very positive response, like, you're correct, and let's start looking at this. It's having that standing in the company and having that ability to influence what we're going to do in the future in a positive way.
And it's all built on lifelong learning, and I think it's been a real enjoyable conversation, Richard. Again, thank you for taking time to sit down and chat with us. Thanks to Ryan Kessler for producing this podcast, and I look forward to seeing you next time, Richard.
Thank you, George.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to listen to new episodes of Stream of Consciousness, available on your preferred podcast listening station.